Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Squadron, President of Our Energy Policy, and welcome to our webinar today on distribution to customers and the issues around electricity and grid distribution at the customer level. The transformative issues there, and we're delighted to have an outstanding panel to discuss this. This is part of, as many of you know, the GridIron Terranauts series that OEP has partnered with the Earthshot Foundation on. This series has been a year-long series digging deeply into all of the issues surrounding grid reliability, security, affordability, capacity, and so forth. And we welcome all of you to look at previous webinars on our site and really dive into the white papers that are going to be produced as a result of this very deep dive with hundreds of experts participating on this important issue. So we're going to have an outstanding discussion today. I would remind everyone that we will take questions from the audience toward the latter part of the hour. So if you do have questions, put them into the chat, and we'll get to as many of the questions from you as we can. The only other thing I would say is, as you all know, our energy policy, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, we are committed to civil dialogue on some of the challenges that we all face in the energy space. One of the services we provide is our online resource library, and if you want to do additional research on this and other topics, please take advantage of that. So I'm going to turn it over to our outstanding panel now, and I'm going to introduce our host and moderator, Mariko Geronimo. Mariko has been the leader of the speakers and the whole sessions on our partnership with Earthshot and the Earthshot Foundation's GridIron series. She is a brilliant economist who has been working for decades on analyzing policy and economics around electricity systems. She's the chief energy economist at Lumen Energy Systems. She is the chief economist for the Earthshot Foundation, and she will moderate our panel today. Mariko, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you to Our Energy Policy for your incredible partnership in the GridIron dialogues. And thank you to the Earthshot Foundation team and our GridIron participants, including today's panelists, for elevating these conversations. We have a terrific panel for you today. Laura Schepis is the U.S. policy leader for Carrier Energy, a startup within Carrier, bringing grid solutions to market in 2026. Aubrey Johnson is the Vice President of System Planning and Competitive Transmission at the Mid-Continent ISO, overseeing all aspects of transmission plan development across the MISO footprint and its interregional collaborations. Killian McKenna is a Senior Engineer at the freshly renamed National Laboratory of the Rockies, formerly known as NREL. Please all forgive me if I accidentally say NREL. I'm just used to it. I'm getting used to the new name. Killian leads the lab's research into distributed energy resources, electrical distribution planning and operation, and demand-side resources. Welcome, Laura, Aubrey, and Killian, and thank you for being here. So let's get on the field right away. Killian, I'll start with you. We've heard a lot in the GridIron about industry objectives for a reliable, resilient, safe, affordable grid. Your team has published extensively on advancing the distribution system and distributed energy resources. What do you see as the biggest challenges right now to the realization of that grid that we all want?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. The way I see it, we're in a kind of generational opportunity to transform the grid. And I'll talk a lot about problems, but then we should also talk about solutions where we want to head. Because right now we've got a lot of aging infrastructure. We've got a lot of really old sections of the distribution systems, a lot of which are past their expected lifetimes. We've got assets out there that are 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. I talked to some planning engineers, 90-year-old assets. And they're approaching time where we need to kind of do a refresh of the grid. At the same time, we're also seeing reliability challenges, particularly on the distribution side of the house. Just the past 5 years, we've seen kind of average interruptions for the distribution system in excess of 300 minutes. If we compare that to, say, Europe, it's about 150 minutes, but half of the interruptions we're seeing on the distribution side are caused by major events. So we're talking about, hurricanes, winter storms, wildfire events. Those are also resulting in really high capital expenditure on resilience and recovery investments. At the same time of all of that, we've got this expansion kind of challenge and opportunity of we see, continued load growth, say from the commercial and residential sector, both for, adoption of heat pumps and EVs, but then also this kind of large growth or large load opportunity, which I know we'll all probably have different definitions for what large load means, right? But we're talking about, data centers and, indigenous manufacturing coming back and various other forms of large commercial and industrial loads. So there's this expansion challenge that we have at the same time. The opportunity that I see is to make sure that we're making investments that last the next 40, 50 years and are right sized both for load growth and for resilience and capturing aging infrastructure at the same time, so that we are not making kind of siloed investments in each of these areas, but one of those investments that can take advantage of all of these kind of integrated pathways and also take into advantage like all these great opportunities with grid modernization, automation, and digitalization that we can do to unlock more of the utilization of the grid. So at least that's what I see as kind of some of the big challenges and opportunities woven into one. And hopefully that sets some of the context for the discussion today.
Well, Aubrey, let me ask you, I'd like to pull on that thread of large loads from Killian. Large loads have been the talk of the town in 2025. In some respects, they're a new dynamic on the grid, but in many ways, it seems like they're putting a spotlight on challenges we already knew were there. Some we've spent our careers working on. These interconnection studies have always been a huge challenge, incorporating flexible loads into markets and operations, building consensus and grid planning across a huge range of public participants. How are large loads changing the game for you? And in what ways are they helping cut through some of these problems and institutional barriers in a new way, or are they just creating a renewed sense of urgency on these issues?
Right. So thank you. That's a good question. But I also start with a little bit of kind of going back to what Killian spoke of. And I think he identifies a really interesting confluence about the challenges that we're seeing today. So again, he talked about aged infrastructure, and earlier you talked about affordability and all these things. And these are words that we're seeing day in and day out as we talk about all these other issues. But I think one of the things we're losing sight of today with some of the challenges is we are dealing with replacement of aged infrastructure that is well past its useful life. So we've deferred some of that capital outlay. We've deferred some of that execution because the assets proved used and useful beyond their original life cycle. Well, that check is coming due today, and it's coming due at a time where we have this other problem where we're seeing these large loads. He also spoke about heat pumps and electrification that's occurring throughout the industry. And so if I continue to think about, again, this confluence, you're seeing load growth that we did not expect, or we did expect, but it is actually starting to materialize more consistently and at a faster rate than what we account for. I like to say along the way is we've replaced all the light bulbs. We've done all of the energy efficiency things that kind of carried us for probably 15 to 20 years. Yeah. And so now what you're starting to see is the buildup of electrification, the buildup of EVs. And then on top of that, we're seeing these large data centers coming in. So those exacerbate the low growth that we're seeing. And it's happening at a much faster and larger level than what we've historically seen from an industrial base. So, again, when you think about an industrial base, you don't necessarily think about an industrial base happening all across the country and could happen anywhere. It may need to be somewhere near a river. It may need to be somewhere where there's a natural resource. And so the industrial base, the industrial revolution, industrial growth has a lot been more localized. Whereas what we're seeing with data centers, you find that all across the country. And typically you just need access to land and water and electricity, and that opens up the playing field. One of the things to do is to really think long-term. And long-term, if we think about this, increased loads should reduce electricity costs. With the right regulatory rate structure, if you increase the denominator, and the numerator ultimately stays at whatever level and relatively fixed, the overall cost of electricity goes down long term. The problem we're seeing today is we're seeing, again, the confluence of a lot of things happening today. And I think they become exacerbated by the large loads. And the large loads become a forcing function to say, how much more transmission, how much more generation can we build? How quickly can we do these things to ensure that the system operates reliability and we don't foreclose on the opportunity to participate in this, recognizing both the economic and the national interest and national defense aspects of what we're seeing from automated, from AI, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, so we've known that there's potential in load growth, not in data centers per se, not all of us saw that coming, but certainly with other large loads like manufacturing, with electrification of transportation fleets and building electrification and so on. And I've asked myself, why are data centers different? From my perspective, they're coming in fast and they're saying, if you don't fix it, I'm going to figure it out myself. And that's scary for an industry that's built to serve customers. It's also scary for an industry that's coming, that's facing this clash of, like what Killian and Aubrey were saying, of incredible cost pressures of a check coming due, but also pressures to reduce costs and address affordability. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Great question. It's a pleasure and a challenge to follow Killian and Aubrey. They're both so deeply experienced, and I agree with every single thing they both said, but your question is pointing me in a different direction a little bit. I'm a utility person in my bones over 2 decades, even though I sit with the manufacturing community now. I have ultimate confidence in utilities to handle load growth and challenges. That's what the system's built for. That's what the utility culture is built for. And the tens of thousands of people in the industry are so proud of their ability to deliver that 24/7, 365 service. So I know they're up to the challenge, and I know they push back on the idea that what we're facing now is unprecedented. They'll go so far as truly significant. So I'll go that far too. But here we have a national conversation around energy caused by these large loads that in my 25 years, I have not seen. I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia, one county over from Data Center Alley, and the headlines are real. Energy costs were a factor in our election. I'm from Georgia, so I can tell you it's real there too.
Mm-hmm.
And larger, sophisticated customers, manufacturing, ports, hospitals, military bases, they've been paying attention and they're responsible stewards of their energy consumption and their bills. So they've been on sort of high alert probably since 2022 and the natural gas price spike and the supply chain constraints. But now you've got legislators and more regulators, and maybe not just the energy regulators, but other cabinet officials around governors. And you've got regular people paying attention to energy. So hopefully we can, to pick up on Killian's very first sentence, take advantage of the opportunity of all these new stakeholders and all this new engagement to really push through and find solutions. And I'll come back to, because I'm an optimist as well as a utility person, come back to some ideas across the panel about how we can push through.
Aubrey.
So I'd like to piggyback a little bit off of Laura's comment in the sense of one of the things, I too am from Georgia, and I am aware of the election that just occurred there relative to the Public Service Commission. And one of the things that I think that we're all going to be challenged by going forward is this whole discussion about electricity costs and really understanding what some of the drivers are and how that focus is and how that works for the everyday citizen who really just wants to flip the switch and ensure that their lights come on, and they want their cost to be as cheap as possible. Unfortunately, those are not easy conversations, and I recommend everyone at least pursue or peruse a book called The Language of Trust by Michael Maslansky, and it really talks about some of the challenges we have in the electric utility industry about speaking to some of those challenges. And ultimately, what this book's premise is that facts don't matter in a post-trust era. And so I've had a personal experience trying to explain to members of my family how electricity works and how electricity rates work.
Right.
And it's extremely challenging, and you've got to figure out how to meet people where they are and answer the questions that they have concerns about in a language that they will understand relative to their perspective. And part of the challenge for all of us is we're so immersed in this, and we speak from things for what our perspective is and what our facts show, and they fail to make the connection with the everyday citizen who doesn't live in that world. And that's what I think one of the predominant challenges we're going to have, no matter what we speak to relative to large loads, whether it's aged infrastructure, all of those things are really going to be a real challenge, especially with the environment that we're seeing in now and how the cost of electricity is now pretty much in the political landscape and part of an everyday conversation.
Well, I think understanding what the customer is going through, what they're seeing, that's so important. So let's stick with that. All different types of customers, what they're experiencing, what kind of choices they have. In the GridIron, we have just discussed affordability a lot, and more specifically in the session we all attended, retail rates and how they've changed in different parts of the country. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory recently came out with a much needed study for us all, inspecting retail rates across the country. If we can, we'll put that study in the chat, but I recommend reading it. This study overall, it suggests we shouldn't be worried, but it kind of depends on the state you're in. The study is backward looking. It's not really capturing the current wave of rate increases. We've seen other studies and customer surveys that are sounding the alarm on affordability. So which is it? Are retail rates and affordability problematic, or are they not? And how concerned should we be about the current and future costs of the grid? I'll open that to whoever wants to comment first. It's at the top of all of our minds, I'm sure.
Well, without dodging the question, I want to say that, Aubrey, while you were talking in the first round, I wrote down trust. And I'm so glad you mentioned that book and Michael Maslansky, who has a really great track record of helping the utility industry find the words to use and the words to lose when talking to regular people. And y'all, I've been doing government relations for a long time. Regular people includes everybody: regulators, governors, members of Congress. We all have a responsibility to talk to them in language that they can take in and formulate a response to. I'll answer the question. I used to be responsible for messaging about rates and bills and the cost of electrons to 1.2 million people. I would go in any day, but especially today, I would go into that audience now humble, honest, and acknowledging that rates are a real concern. We tend to talk about the middle class. We tend to talk a lot about data centers and innovation, and forget sometimes that 25 and 30% of our population really can struggle to make ends meet and really has alarm when they open not just their electric utility bill, but all the bills. And there's that impact too. Everything is going up. And so that makes even a cost of inflation, rate of inflation increase in your utility bills even more difficult to take in and adjust for.
Yeah, I mean, we're used to thinking about customers in the industry as the average retail customer. And a lot can get lost with that average. A lot can get lost in terms of what individual people and households and businesses are experiencing. So that really resonates with me. The other thing is the rate study made adjustments for inflation, which of course makes sense to me as an economist, but for the everyday person to say rates aren't increasing in real, I mean, it just,
Yeah.
real dollars aren't real for the real person. So I know it can be a confusing message.
I think it's really challenging. And I would say, again, all of this is a matter of perspective. And if you think about the perspective from those of us who are the least of these, the people who may challenge for food security, housing security, all other types of just everyday security, any change is significant. I've worked for utilities and had to deal with rate increases in rural areas, and I've had some very humbling discussions around those things. And I think ultimately one of the challenges we have, and I think Killian, you talked about this when we were together out in Denver. One of the challenges we have is we also have to help make the connection around the value of electricity and what it means for everyday life today, and understanding how things work. And in all of us to a certain extent are several steps away from retail rate making and how you deal with actual customer bills, et cetera. And we're working on a lot of things that have a very macro impact. I work on transmission portfolios. I'm working on network upgrades for generator interconnections. And we talk about things in the billions of dollar range. And those things can be eye-popping. Those things with the everyday person who pays the bill and they hear these billions of dollars all the time, it really starts to resonate and makes a direct connection with what they're seeing on a monthly basis. One of the key things we have to do is make the connection to the value of electricity for all of those. What are people getting for that? What are the things that have changed, been life-changing for what our industry provides? And so one of the real challenges I believe that our members, our regulators, everyone in the industry has is connecting the value of what that is, because oftentimes it's just assumed to be there and people don't make the connection with what's required for it to be there.
Well, some people do make the connection, I think, and invest themselves. So, Killian, can you comment on that a bit? So I understand that the cost of electricity service from the traditional grid, that is so important, and making sure it's available and affordable, but how is the customer's experience with grid service changing now, especially given the choice that they have? Because Aubrey, to kind of build upon what you're saying, if a customer does see the value and they're not happy with the grid service, they have options now, right?
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing that in a lot of states with like net energy metering programs or net billing programs where there's been a massive uptake in DER. I think totals right now are there's around 50 gigawatts of small scale rooftop or DER capacity out there. But I think to go back to, I'm going to jump around a little, to go back to something that Aubrey said on like how can we use this opportunity to bring rates down, right? That is all about enhancing the utilization of the infrastructure we already have, in my mind, right? Because it's how do we do more with what we already have built? And I come mainly from the distribution side. I work a lot with distribution utilities. They have more tools in their toolbox than they've ever had before, right? You go back not even 10, 20 years ago, distribution systems are being built on a kind of fit and forget idea in principle, because you don't have any visibility of what's out there. You don't have any visibility of load growth, right? So you are sizing without all of these tools that we have now in terms of load forecasting, in terms of non-wireless alternatives, in terms of like even just the last decade, the AMI rollout. We finally have visibility on the utilization of all these different sections of the grid that we never even had a couple of years ago, right? So we have this huge opportunity to look at where grid capacity is and say, actually, if you build here, we can just increase the utilization of the infrastructure, and we don't need to build greenfield infrastructure, and that will help bring or bring downward pressure on rates, because that's increasing the utilization of the grid, to Aubrey's point. I think for the customer, there's like a lot of different drivers here on, yes, we've seen the costs of DER come dramatically down over the last decade. It does present this opportunity for customers that if they want to put generation behind the meter, that they can. But there's also this kind of reliability challenge that we're seeing of, we are seeing utilities who, I said that average was around 300 minutes per year, but we're seeing utilities far exceed that with some of these major events come through. So there's also this kind of, how do we right size the resilience investment? How is that done behind the meter? How is that done in front of the meter? And then how can we leverage both of these resources to maximize the potential of the grid, right? If customers are investing in behind the meter assets, how can we leverage those for not just their benefit, but the benefits of their neighbors? How can we look at community microgrids and VPPs? Because these are all big opportunities that we've never had before that we can start to utilize. So I think just to kind of emphasize, grid planning 10, 20 years ago looks very, very different to grid planning today, which, you talk to some planners like, hey, the complexity of choice now is really challenging, but it's also, this huge opportunity landscape that we need to navigate right again to get this grid right for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
We have seen that, Killian, as a theme throughout the GridIron. I'd say that the concept of we need to use the existing grid as much as possible to put it to the best use possible as sort of like a pathway to offsetting cost pressures. So we see that in fuel supply. Data centers are using we see data centers doing it. They're using stranded gas and nuclear assets, using our wires to the most we can, generation capacity. I also think of DERs as customer funded existing capacity, actually. Like we can send their capabilities up to the bulk grid too as flexible load. Does anyone else want to, Aubrey or Laura, did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, so I do think a couple of things. One is, I think it's good business, and everybody has to agree that we have to think about how you maximize the existing system. There are the downstream challenges that come with that, because as you utilize existing right away, you do other things along those lines, there become short-term pressures from costs that have to be dealt with and overcome. But there's a long-term benefit to that. Again, I think Killian hit on a great deal there when we think about things like distributed energy resources. They can be a valuable way to serve and short or shrink peak issues. And how do you actually not have to build additional generation for peak capacity, other things that create longer term savings. But we also have to understand the need to have more visibility to those resources, because if they're going to be an integral part and part of the solution, then there has to be more visibility to those as well also. And I think the other thing we have to continue to remember and remind ourselves is we're also at a point where the growth that we're seeing and expect to see over the next 20 years far supersedes anything we've seen in the last 40, 50, 60 years. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, there's a limitation on the value that we extract by maximizing the existing system. So all of these things become a yes and we need to be careful that we don't create a mindset that it's one or the other, because in order for us to continue to do the things we want to do to get to the places that we want to go, we have to create a yes and mindset around it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll again endorse. I think yes and is an excellent motto for this combined supplemented energy community, which is utilities, labs, regulators, manufacturers, customers, advocates. We have a lot more in common than we have to disagree about, and hopefully we can rally around yes and, or I think coming out of our GridIron, non-zero, I think is another rallying cry. I want to highlight the great value that AI and the data centers are bringing to all of this work. Since we've, set them out in the challenge column early on in this webinar, I want to make sure that we absolutely highlight what they contribute in the opportunity column as well. A lot of utilities can afford to have AI on hand, and the data and analytics teams, the people that thankfully it still takes to take that data and use it and apply it across the grid. I don't think we can assume that every single utility can do that yet. So we need to workshop that issue together and across the GridIron series. And regulators, short-staffed, sometimes not too long in the office. How do we come together and help them understand that a fantastic demand response program in the Northeast or in California can absolutely find a home in the Midwest or the Southeast? And lessons go from the Southeast and the Midwest out to the coasts as well. But time is short, and we need more voices telling these stories in a relatable way.
Yeah, and that yes and mentality, I think that's wonderful. It brings us to exactly where I wanted to land in this conversation. It makes sense to me that making sure that we can bring on new large loads, interconnect new large loads on the system, that increases the denominator, as you said, of the rate equation, Aubrey, and you're just spreading more fixed cost across more customers, and that can offset cost pressures. But when we do that, we don't want to create scarcity. We want to have all these mechanisms for using demand response and DERs and the existing capacity, make sure we're not creating scarcity by doing that. And that brings us to this idea that we want it all. We want electricity service to be available, to be high quality, to be affordable to customers. Electricity, after all, is a public good. It's a matter of economic growth. It's a matter of national security. It's a matter of our health and prosperity. We've explored the concept of energy abundance in the GridIron dialogues, but we can all see that under the current paradigm, we're faced with a lot of trade-offs when we're trying to address that cost problem. Laura, you were also with us in the GridIron's fuel supply dialogue back in June, and there you asked the question most clearly that I've heard: does the industry need a new playbook? Can you talk more about that, why you asked that question, what energy abundance means to you, and whether or not, or to what extent, you think that strategy or mentality can guide us?
Absolutely. Being from Georgia, of course, I'm a football fan and I have a favorite for the SEC championship coming up Saturday. I don't know, Aubrey, if we need to talk about that after the panel.
I'm more interested in who plays on Sunday, and they're not doing so well. So that's another story.
All right. All right. Well, I want to compliment Our Energy Policy and the Earthshot Foundation for this entire GridIron dialogue. Just that framing helps people come to the table and start to understand each other and put aside their particular expertise and their particular jargon. So in this season, thinking about Thanksgiving and holidays, and thinking about customers as they take a turn into what looks like a pretty cold winter in some parts of the country. I can't help but think about energy abundance in terms of Roosevelt's four freedoms articulated in the 1941 State of the Union address. And the two that apply for people are, in this situation, are freedom from want and freedom from fear. When you think about individuals, that comes to mind. When you talk about commercial and industrial customers, in addition to having that freedom from fear and want. And on the positive side, maybe we should express that as confidence that you can use your heat and your lights. On the commercial and industrial side, they also would like to have confidence in the abundance, but they are also in the business of please no surprises. They're on an annual budget. They would like to be able to see over the horizon for a year or 2 years, and they want to have some type of level view of what they need to spend and what they need to plan for. So to go back to that very first question, we talked about what we understand as experts, which is that a very large load will come in and then it will contribute into the system and costs will go down for everybody. I think 15 years ago, when people weren't paying as close of attention, there was trust in that formula. But if there's one thing that we can all do together, utilities, lawmakers, policymakers, data centers, other large loads, develop the way to really talk through that equation and restore that trust and get ready to be transparent if there's going to be a non-linear path to that magic effect.
I think Laura hits a couple of really good points that I'd like to kind of emphasize as well also. And I think one of the things I've shared with members of like the Data Center Coalition and other places is, again, the conversations that we have in the public discourse need to be at a level where people can understand and connect with. Data centers that want to locate need to be more specific in what they are willing to do. I've been in these panel discussions where people say, oh, we can be interruptible. Don't say you can be interruptible if you don't plan to be interruptible, right? Or, our backup generation can be used to support the grid. Don't say that if you're not creating the infrastructure for your backup generation to be fed into the grid. Those are different configurations. Think about how you highlight what your term contract is going to be and have the utilities be able to articulate what the clawback provisions would be if in fact they don't meet and deliver on the outcomes and the outputs that they talk about. And so there's so much that has to be said and understood with the amount of attention that's being paid to the work that's trying to take place today, and understanding that even without the data centers, even without the advancement, we would need to build more generation because the generation we have has aged out. And ultimately, the generation we build today will be more efficient and reduce ongoing costs day in and day out for operating those types of projects, those types of plants that we built today. So part of it is we have to understand that there's a certain amount that needs to happen and would happen regardless of whether or not the data centers were there. And the data centers themselves have to continue to be a little bit more, I think, focused in the discussions that happen in the public landscape or in a lot of these industry spaces where people can have a better understanding and representation of what's being asked for, what's capable of being delivered, and how it works to the overall betterment and benefit of the communities that it will go into.
Maybe to build onto that, there's some fantastic points that Aubrey and Laura just raised. And I think when we talk about either a load serving request or an interconnection request, it's this dialogue that's going back and forth between grid planners and load developers of what can both sides bring to the table, right? So creating more visibility on the grid side in terms of like, well, here's the best places that we can put these large loads, and here's where you can actually utilize existing infrastructure. But from the developer side, what are the specific forms of flexibility that you can provide? What is the actual peak demand that you're going to see? What's your ramp rate to get up to the nameplate that you're trying to connect to the grid? Do you actually need it all at once, or are you going to take a while to fill up the capacity for that data center, right? And then you can start to talk about, well, what are the bridging solutions for power that we can get to get you online now, and then we can meet that ramp as well. But this is it's been this kind of changing evolution on the interconnection side, both from the generation side and the load side, from here's a request, just serve it, right? To actually, what's the best way that we can execute on this? Because particularly with these large loads, there's this kind of big mismatches in a few different areas. One is the reliability of the grid, right? Some of these large load developers are looking for 4 to 5 nines worth of reliability. And we talked about earlier the distribution system, which is not going to serve all of this, but as outage rates interruption durations of around 300 minutes per year. So that's one mismatch, which also creates a kind of opportunity, right? If you're willing to invest in all of this reliability behind the meter, can we move some of that front of the meter so then everyone can kind of get some benefits from that investment too? And then there's this other mismatch in timeline of, we're used to large loads requests on the grid side being, a 3-5 year process, particularly with supply chain challenges right now. And it's like, hey, I want this in a couple of months, right? That's another big mismatch. Right. And then finally, there's a mismatch in cost of these developers who are willing to pay more than current grid rates in some instances. So how can we deal with all of these mismatches in these conversations that Aubrey and Laura are highlighting?
So this has been a fantastic discussion. I heard a lot of great points here. We talked about the potential that new demands bring, the opportunities they bring, and that DERs bring as well. We've heard about how much cost pressure we have and that we have a bill coming due across the whole grid architecture, but that we need to communicate and connect more effectively with customers to understand what they need, what their capabilities are. We need to restore trust in grid service. And we need to get that yes and mentality, that abundance mentality. There are a few pathways to achieving abundance. We know we've explored that in the GridIron. Making sure we're supporting load growth appropriately is one of them. More efficient, effective planning. We talked about better use of the existing system. So that's wonderful. I really appreciate these conversations. Before we turn it over to the audience for Q&A, did anyone have any final points they wanted to make?
I wanted to make a final point and commend or compliment DOE, because they have raised some important questions and kicked off 2 initiatives that I hope are going to help us all as this expanded, more diverse energy community, help us get to some answers. And one is the Speed to Power RFI. There was so much opportunity for diverse viewpoints to come into that RFI, and as a demand response provider soon in 2026, we're excited about that conversation. And then I missed this over Thanksgiving, but Killian probably knows more about it. DOE announced that all 17 of the labs are going to pool all their brilliance and all their resources in the Genesis project, meant to absolutely capture all the value that we can out of AI in many different verticals across the economy. I think that's really exciting for DOE to be leading, and we're looking forward to engaging in both of those conversations next year.
All right, thank you, Laura. I'll turn it over to Our Energy Policy for the audience Q&A. Looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mariko. Our first question is, when was the last major transmission line actually built in the United States? And how are we addressing the major problem with public opposition to many of these projects?
I think that's kind of a loaded question, because I think major transmission gets built every day. So I think it's a relative concern in that regard. I'll say a couple of things about things in the MISO region. If you think about big portfolios, in 2022, we approved our first long-range transmission plan portfolio, which is roughly $12 billion of projects, if you will, that are scheduled to come online in the 2030, 2032 timeframe. And then in 2024, we approved our Tranche 2.1, which also changes a lot of the native voltage in the MISO area to a 765 kV line, which will be some of the largest power lines in the country. And that portfolio is scheduled to come online between 2034 and 2038. So one of the things we can see is that, really large regional transmission takes anywhere from 6 to 10, 12 years to get built. And I think one of the things that we have to understand a lot is, Killian mentioned disconnects. Well, there's a lot of disconnects when we think about electrical infrastructure as well also. Most major transmission projects, many major transmission projects suffer from not in my backyard. People don't want to see those lines, but yet they also want the benefits that come from those lines. And so I think the challenges we see today have not changed. You still have problems with siting. You still have problems with permitting, and you still have problems with public outrage, public concern about, ultimately high voltage lines coming through an area where they would prefer that they not be. And unfortunately, that's necessary. That's a disconnect, because the value of transmission is to move energy from where it's produced to where it's used and useful and needed. And ultimately, more often than not, that means you're going to help move power, many miles. And so that is probably an ongoing challenge. And one of the challenges that actually increases the amount of time that it takes to build transmission.
Aubrey, how about with interregional transmission? What's the status of that, and are we
so
making
in fact,
progress there?
Again, in the MISO space, we are, and our board will approve next week an interregional transmission project between MISO, AECI, and SPP. And so this is a fairly significant transmission line. But I think one of the things that we have to recognize, again, is there's multiple types of transmission and multiple types of value for transmission. And one of the things that starts happening when you start thinking about interregional transmission is the confluence of reliability as well as economic benefit. And the challenge with transmission, whether it be interregional, regional, or local, the fundamental question becomes who pays for it, who benefits for it. Right. And the more people you have to engage in that conversation, the more challenging it is for it to get done.
Thank you. And now, what role does the panel see for microgrids being designated as national security assets and other ways in which we can see the full value add of other distributed energy resources?
Mariko, I'll take a shot at that one.
Please.
Based on my days working for and with electric utilities on national security issues, and then having helped lead a utility that had an abundance of military installations, microgrids are an incredibly important bespoke solution. But if you drive around your community or across your state, you will never understand how many military, intelligence, and other critical national security installations are all around you. And so we're going to have to find other solutions to support those, that critical infrastructure with backup power and the 5 nines of resilience that they need. Microgrids are just going to be too expensive, especially in the period that we're in, that we've been discussing for the last hour. All the resources, all the supply chain, all the dollars are flowing to many other needs.
Killian, did you want to comment on that at all?
No, I think Laura captured it great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Next question. I know that it may be more complicated, but to what extent would simply hiring more full-time staff to run regulatory and permitting offices improve these processes? would that make it easier to administer regulations and process permits faster?
I'll take a swing at that a little bit. One is, in many cases, this can be niche work. And ultimately, I think it's a supply and demand function. So one, we got to be able to find the people. I think at the highest level, the answer is yes. If you could have more throughput, things would work better, et cetera, et cetera. It may not change some of the challenges though, because there's a lot of public outreach that has to occur. There are a lot of the whole permitting process, the whole regulatory process has certain timing functions built within it that have to be addressed. And so at the highest level, more people should give you more throughput, but I don't know that it's just that simple.
We definitely need more people. And then for the people that we do have, there is a great promise in using AI to accomplish a lot of the grunt work of going through a 500-page or 1,000-page document. And so the more that we can build trust in the bosses of those people, that there's a responsible way to use these tools and get a really good product and increase productivity, the better off we'll be.
Just to jump on that, at the lab, we've been doing a ton of work on permitting and interconnection and trying to speed up those processes. And it's all about data, having good data, having interconnected data, and then having, what I would call like gold quality data that then you can layer all these great AI applications on. We had a project for a number of years that's been ongoing with SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, where we fully automated their DER interconnection process. Took us, 2 years of integrating all of their AMI, their SCADA, their GIS, their CIS systems, their power flow models, cleaning up loads of data. And we've been trying to take that to the other utilities too. And there's this kind of very diverse data landscape that we see when we work with every new utility of kind of what's the format, how can we approach it? And we're exploring how we can use different forms of AI to accelerate that process of bringing all this data together and also making it more accessible for all of the planning engineers, that they don't need to all be experts in SQL databases or Python or C++, that they can go and work with an AI agent and kind of start to do these requests in these large data sets. Because similar to the opportunities, all this opportunity creates more complexity, which creates more challenges for the planning engineers, which means they need to do a more holistic job than they've ever done before in analyzing everything. Rules of thumb don't seem to be good enough anymore. So yeah, creating more tools for planning engineers to be able to kind of execute these interconnection requests or large load requests are really critical to speed up some of the process here.
But that's a gold star example of the kind of great work we should all be trying our best to showcase.
Yeah, and let me also say, I think I tell people, I joke all the time that I've been to AI rehab. I've rethought the way that I think about how some of these tools can help with the work that we're doing day in and day out. I still think we have to understand some of the overall limitations of staffing and people as well also, because ultimately, no matter what I use a tool for, I need to be able to understand whether or not the tool is giving me good relevant information that I can actually take to the bank and what I need to do if that's not the case. The other thing that I think we have to be cognizant of, and we're starting to see this with the work that we're doing in MISO with our interconnection processes. Next year, this year, and just this last week, we just posted our phase 1 studies for our 2023 Q cycle. We did that in about 90 days. That's the fastest we've ever done a phase 1 study in the history of our company. Next year, we're going to do a phase 1 study, I'm predicting, in about 45 days. And so fundamentally, the whole industry and all interconnection customers have to be prepared for that. And my message to people is be careful what you ask for, you might get it. And ultimately, we have to be prepared, and the whole ecosystem has to be prepared for advancement that comes because we want to do things faster. And I think those things are really, really important as we think about all the building blocks that are required for us to do the things we're doing. That means you're going to see more permits requests coming through. You're going to see more public outreach. All of those things happen when we ask for things to happen faster.
And Aubrey, I think I might have missed it, but you're able to achieve those speeds through leaning more into AI tools?
Well, it's actually more system engineering, cloud-based computing, and ultimately having a better understanding of how to utilize our data. Killian mentioned something earlier, and no matter if we want to talk about AI, the real thing is data. Data is the key for everything. Data is the straw that stirs the drink. So any type of advancement you want to try and move forward, it has to be that you have to own your data first. You have to understand how to sort your data and use your data for the outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
So I'm sorry to jump in here in what's been such a fascinating conversation, but I do actually have a final question. I'm going to sort of exercise my prerogative. The conversation has been so tremendous, and a big part of it had to do with communication with consumers, regulators, legislators. Is there anything specific that any of you would suggest that we really should be doing better or doing more of, doing differently in terms of improving that communication, education, so that people do understand, as Aubrey, you said, that this is not magic coming out of a wall, but this is a huge amount of time, effort, resources, work, ingenuity, et cetera, that goes into making this happen?
There is no one silver bullet, and it's an always on task from wherever your core of responsibility might be to keep your audience educated. I would love to see our diverse energy community team up and really put resources into standing alongside and with our regulators and the staff to keep providing them with the information and tools that they need, taking it to them, whether that's in person or virtually. They're such a wonderful resource for our nation. And the times that I've been able in previous lives to be part of formal or informal NARUC training for the regulators and staff, I've always found it incredibly rewarding.
Well, thanks. I mean, I think your point that there's no one silver bullet, I think underscores also another great point that you all made, which is we're so much better off. And I think the GridIron series and what Earthshot has really been pushing forward, thinking about this as yes and, because when we get into yes but, all that does is take us down a negative road. And I like the formulation of yes and better than the all of the above that people seem to like to use as a catchphrase these days. So I would thank all of you for really underscoring that, because we need to have, not an unrealistic, but a positive collegial approach to what we at OEP try to really encourage in terms of making things move forward. And all of you through your participation in the GridIron series and today, we really thank you for your commitment to this. I also want to thank, as we sign off, our partners, part of our partner program, and our supporters, without which we could not do the things that we do at OEP. So very grateful to all of our supporters and partners for that. And special thanks, of course, to the Earthshot Foundation for the phenomenal work that it's doing in the GridIron Terranauts series. To all of you who took the time to join us today, thank you for being with us. Please let people who who weren't able to make it at this time, that we'll be posting the recording of this outstanding conversation on the OEP website in a couple of days, and they should feel free to take advantage of that then. And then finally, most importantly, Aubrey, Laura, Killian, thank you, and especially Mariko, thank you so much for your time today and for your really insightful comments. And I wish all of you a great rest of the week, and certainly as we go into it, a great holiday season. Thanks again.